USA kalder sig gerne The Land of the Free, og millioner af immigranter er gennem årene ankommet til kajpladsen her i New York for at få del i den amerikanske frihed. Men kan det tænkes, at amerikanerne har fået noget galt i halsen, at deres særlige form for frihed rummer flere begrænsninger end muligheder, og at det er en farlig form for frihed? Anden sektion er i denne uge på besøg hos den amerikanske forfatter Jonathan Franzen i hans lejlighed på Manhattan i New York. Den 55-årige Franzen fik sit litterære gennembrud i 2002 med romanen Korrektioner, der beskriver den amerikanske kernefamilies forfaldshistorie i efterkrigstidens stadig mere frigjorte USA. Bogen indbragte Franzen en række prestigefulde priser. Franzen fik dog sit helt store folkelige og internationale gennembrud i 2010 med romanen Frihed. Også i denne bog undersøger Franzen den amerikanske middelklasses kulturelle, moralske og sociale deroute, og han har et særligt blik for udhulningen af det særegne amerikanske frihedsbegreb i efterdønningerne af 9/11. Præsident Obama har fremhævet Frihed som en af hans favoritbøger, og Franzen har, som blot en af 3 forfattere nogensinde, prydet forsiden af det traditionsrige Time Magazine. I takt med sin voksende status har Franzen i de senere år også markeret sig i den offentlige debat. Han er fast tilknyttet det legendariske kulturmagasin The New Yorker og skriver essays om alt fra miljøpolitik til tab af dannelse. Franzen er især bekymret for udbredelsen af digitale kommunikationsmidler, som han mener skaber afstand mellem mennesker, og han er ligeledes stærkt bekymret for udviklingen i det amerikanske demokrati. Jonathan Franzen, thank you very much for seeing us.
It's a pleasure to be here. I mean, wait a minute, I'm here. I'm in my own apartment.
It is your own apartment.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
But the day of our speaking, which is the 4th of November, the Americans are going to the ballots for the midterm election. Yet, when you walk around as a complete stranger and you talk to various people on the street, nobody seems to care much about the election. Some of them even shrug their shoulders and say, "What election?" And that brings me to ask you, as a connoisseur of America. I mean, this country is propagating freedom of speech, democracy to the whole world, and yet when you face the Americans on their own turf, many of them don't seem to care too much about it. Isn't there a paradox there?
The US, what to say? Our electoral system is nothing to be proud of. The minority party it does its best to ensure that as few people vote as possible. Neither side, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans want everyone to vote. It's almost a good thing that the negative advertising discourages people because they want their rabid, hardcore base to vote. And if you can suppress general interest and you can get your own base going, you might win the election. So there are reasons things are the way they are. So that's point one. They're not very good. You look at Europe where whatever the voter participation rate is 80 or 90%.
Yeah, it's quite high in Denmark, for instance.
Yeah, it'll probably be about 37% in a midterm election here. It goes up with the presidential election. We might get half of Americans voting in 2016. The larger thing is that, never mind that the US is promoting freedom and democracy around the world, it is a commercial country. It always was a commercial country, and freedom has meant free markets, kind of a market libertarianism. And that kind of goes across the whole spectrum, and the people who were good, law-abiding citizens did not emigrate from Europe. They stayed in Europe, and they participated in a nice community way in politics. And the people who came here were the ones who thought, wow, a huge empty continent that I can go out into the woods and no one will bother me. That sounds good. And so that's what we've got here, a bunch of people who thought, go out into the woods, leave me alone. And I think a lot of American liberty, the conception of American liberty is very much about freedom from. And lately, with the way that Silicon Valley has been sponsoring this kind of libertarian worldview, that is increasingly coming to mean freedom from government.
But are you also saying that it's a superficial thing when you talk about liberty? It's not in real life. It's not so much a lofty ideal as a commercial thing.
Well, that's a little harsh. I think we have a very good record of civil liberties. Stretching back, I mean, it took us a long time to include African Americans among those who get to have civil liberties. But I think the Bill of Rights, it's a strong document. We have better press freedoms here than really almost anywhere. We have really radical press freedoms. You may not like it, but we have radical freedoms to own guns, really very rugged protections within the legal system, unless you are a military detainee in Guantanamo.
Yeah.
So I don't. It's not really hypocritical. I just think that that the market has always been part of the American conception of liberty and remains so. And people, you know, they're not voting because they're busy with buying things.
But, you know, coming from the other side of the Atlantic pond, I can't help wondering, if you have all this liberty, if you have all these civic liberties, what is stopping America from being the happiest country on earth? Apparently the Danes are the most happy people on earth.
How nice for you. I'm very happy for you, Danes. Well, it's a poor conception of liberty we have. So many Americans believe that it's a great thing if you have 15 different private insurance companies to go to for your health insurance, and that having only one health plan supplied by the government, that's some terrible socialistic, miserable thing. When in fact, if you understand freedom in a somewhat more grown-up way, like the Europeans often do, it's not liberating to have a stack of 15 different insurance policies and you're trying to read the fine print on all of them and you're spending days on the phone trying to get information. It's a nightmare. And then once you have that insurance, trying to get paid for a claim, it's terrible. It's completely, it's the opposite. It's enslaving. And in fact, having national health insurance is a liberating thing, if you have a different conception of liberty. But to the American mind, to a very substantial percentage of the American populace, freedom to choose as a consumer trumps all other freedoms. And there's a large body of psychological studies showing that people are actually happier when they have fewer choices. You want to make someone miserable, you give them 30 choices. You want to make them happy, you give them 3. And so there's this big lie about what freedom really is, which Americans have bought into and have been grown up in, and all of the commercial advertising reinforces this idea that the more choices you have, the better it is.
And how come, because I've seen you also write this in some of your essays, how come the Americans who are actually brought up on a revolutionary ethos, I mean, the whole country itself was founded on revolution, how come you cannot, as a population, take a more critical stance on that particular issue? Because you say the Americans are actually lying to themselves.
Well, you have to remember what it's not an accident that our right-wing party now is called the Tea Party. It reminds us that you could call it a revolution, and there was some military action, although mostly we had a commander-in-chief and George Washington, who spent 6 or 7 years avoiding military engagement. He was a brilliant general. He didn't want to fight battles. And the issues were commercial, and they were particularly anti-tax. We are getting taxed by the British, and we are not having any say in how we're taxed. So, and that's still the battle right now. You know, for the mainstream white Tea Party Republican American, government is the enemy. Intrusive government overtaxing you, not letting you alone, and having your economic freedom. So I don't. This was not a revolution like in Russia, where you had centuries of serfdom, and even after the serfs were liberated, you had something very close to serfdom, and a landed aristocracy. There was no landed aristocracy here. There never was. So there was never that particular class consciousness. It was a bunch of immigrants who got tired of being taxed by Britain, which is a very different valence from the much more class-based revolutions of Europe.
But when you talk to the Tea Party people, which I had the great opportunity of doing a couple of years ago, they would say, look, we represent the truest strand in American thinking. It goes even in the name. So we represent real America.
I think, yes, I think that's broadly true. Thank God there is another side here, and it's an increasing side, because so much of the immigration of the last 130 years has been from places who were not coming to an empty country. They were not rugged individualists. They were coming to a place of economic opportunity, but also coming with expectations of having a government that also protected them. So it's become a more interesting mix, and if we wait another 10 years or 15 years, all those Tea Parties are old and white, and they'll be gone, and we'll become more Danish.
You think so?
I think so, yeah.
In political and social terms?
Yeah, the demographics are all in favor of the left in the US.
Even though the white middle class apparently, in demographical terms, is shrinking, and
I'm saying, because the white middle class is shrinking, and it's being replaced by immigrants who don't have that Yankee anti-government mentality. You can look. I mean, without white males, the Republican Party, the right wing in this country, would be nowhere. They are super conservative, and everyone else is moderate to even liberal, and everyone else is like who we're getting more and more of. So I'm optimistic in the long run.
Well, which is good to hear, but I take it from what you're writing and also saying now that there is a sort of there is a shift, gradual shift taking place in America, which may, according to you, lead America towards some sort of perhaps Scandinavian idea of welfarism and doing politics. On the other hand, if you still have this idea of, you know, taking care of yourself and the pursuit of one's personal happiness, then what is going to stop America from being even more individualistic and, well, if you like, egocentric?
I do think that technology is training people, by and large, to be more libertarian, more individualistic. That's the promise, and so you are one of the more disturbing trends for me is how many young people are voting Republican because they have been drinking the Silicon Valley Kool-Aid and think that you know, no rules, no regulations is cool, and that's very disturbing. But I think you will find that is happening not simply here but around the world. I think that the internet and its associated technologies are basically spewing free market spores in cultures around the world.
And I agree with you, because you wrote, you know, quite a famous essay on that, and I too find it very disturbing. But I just find myself at odds, and also to some degree find that you have a problem in answering what to do about this, because it seems to be hard to change the tide of, you know, this technological wave that sweeps us all over. I mean, how do you stop it? How do you stem it?
Well, it's not really very good news, but the current economic model, even in Denmark, is not really sustainable. We are warming the planet, and there are natural limits, and technology may have its own logic, but technology is ultimately dependent on having a livable planet. And I think as the planet becomes less and less livable, people will begin to take a look at the technology. And the technology cannot fix the problem of a livable planet. It really can't. It can maybe mitigate a little bit, but it can't fix it. So again, long term, it's terrible. One sees growing social unrest, one sees famines, one sees flooding, entire countries flooded, it's bad. But I don't see a techno-utopia filled with atomized individuals who are perfect consumers in a perfect market. I just don't think that that is sustainable, because the whole mentality of tech is kind of taking nature for granted where it shouldn't. This is a really abstract conversation we're having.
When we talk about some of the negative aspects of this spread of technology, the way we communicate, the way people sort of adapt to being, you know, on their iPhones or whatever, you have critics who say, look, Franzen is just a neo-Dudite who's afraid of the new world. Doesn't he really see that, you know, being on Twitter, being on Facebook, blah, 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 would actually benefit not only you as a writer, but the way that we communicate, the way that we interact with each other, so people from New York, Copenhagen and Shanghai can all of a sudden, you know, be in touch with each other. It's a cultural richness, not a problem. That's the argument.
I am impressed with how defensive the supporters of social media and the tech world are. Some novelist that not even that many people have heard of happens to say, you know, a lot of this behavior doesn't actually seem very productive. It seems kind of addictive. And the level of discourse that it promotes doesn't seem to be very high or interesting. It seems to be lowering the level of discourse. And yes, there are happy success stories. Somebody has a Twitter campaign and some corrupt anti-feminist politician in India is brought down. Wonderful thing, great. These things do happen. I'd be the first to admit it. And of course, I use the internet constantly, every day. And as an information tool, it's amazing. As a buying tool, it's even better. I love being able to make my own plane reservations. But this notion that we're going to have a new and better humanity because of this technology, it's like, it doesn't really square with the phenomenon of how people cannot stop doing this. They're just doing this and they are getting, and it just looks, literally, it looks like those rats in the old experiments who they have a little electrode in their brain, and if they keep pressing the button, and they keep getting a little jolt of pleasure, and they will just basically do that till they fall over dead. That's kind of what a lot of the interaction with social media and the internet looks like to me. It's like constant stimulation, but no narrative and all too seldom any subtlety of thought or sustenance of thought. So anyway, I come along and I mildly point out, you know, something here, and given that it's enriching a few who started from a place of privilege and are becoming enormously more privileged because of this, and that meanwhile, globally, yes, things are getting better for Chinese and Indians,
exactly.
Broadly speaking, if you don't pay any attention to what they're doing to the environment, and what's being done to the global environment. But it seems to me that we're witnessing this acceleration in the concentration of the wealth in the hands of a relatively few. We're seeing an acceleration of the degradation of the environment. Mm. What is so great about this that some individual novelist who says, you know, I'm not that into it, I think Twitter's kind of dumb. It's like, rah, 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 rah. People are just like, Franzen must die.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, people who are confident, who are doing things that are really obviously good, you're doing community organizing, you're working in a mental hospital, you're helping sick kids, whatever. Someone says, I don't really like what you're doing. They say, fuck you. What I'm doing is obviously valid. This is obviously a good thing to do. So the hostility, the level of hostility suggests to me that I'm on the right track. That people who have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of don't attack like that.
But
and if the critique is that internet culture, social media culture in particular, fosters enormous levels of rage based on, in most cases, people not having even read what the person they're enraged with said, then this just sort of proves it. This is exactly my point.
This is a grand question, but still, where do you see the future of the novel? I know it's a classic question, but you know, there are colleagues of yours who keep saying, look, we're entrenched by mass media, by social media, and the future of the novel, it's being squeezed out and it's facing, you know, a real rough ride. Do you see it the same way?
No, I don't see it that way. Especially not since I forgave television and began to see cable drama as a form of the novel. Up until cable drama became very good, it was possible to worry that all the talent was draining away from the novel into visual media. And now that I see shows like Breaking Bad or Oregon, yeah. I think, you know, that they're doing good work, and they are providing sustained narratives, and that's what it's all about, because the enemy is not the visual media. The enemy is this atomization of everything, so that you might, for a few days on Twitter, follow some controversy, and there's a sort of narrative about that. You know, black kid in Ferguson, Missouri gets shot by the police, and you're following that for some days. There is a sort of narrative there, but then it goes away, and it's as if it never was, because no one ever really shaped that into a meaningful narrative. So I think that there will always be people who are looking for some kind of meaningful narrative, some sustained meaningful narrative in whatever form it takes. I'm partial to books because I think novels can do certain things that no other art form can. And I think there will always be people who perceive that about novels and want to write them themselves, but I'm not picky. I'm really, I don't think the kind of thought and the kind of storytelling I care about is going to disappear from the world.
But I'm wondering here at the end of our conversation, you mentioned earlier, Jonathan, that you see some tremendous changes taking place inside American society. But if you shift your perception to a more international aspect. Do you think the so-called American century, or the American predominance of the world, is waning, that it's coming to a close?
In the most important respects, not at all. We are still militarily dominant, and we have single-handedly ensured that there will be no meaningful global action on climate change. Because all it took was us to say, nah, we don't feel like going through with what we agreed to in Kyoto, and we don't feel like making any actual serious efforts to reduce carbon emissions. No one else had to. So if the US doesn't do it, no one does. European Union tried to and then said, forget it, by and large. I mean, there are some good things going on in certain countries, including Denmark and Germany, in terms of renewable energy. But even in Germany, they're burning coal. Coal burning is increasing in Germany, partly for free trade reasons. But basically, we had veto power over whether to do anything about climate change. Long run, is there a bigger issue, really, than the planet heating up? Well, nuclear weapons, maybe. But we have a lot of those, too. We have more operational nuclear warheads than anyone else. So, I don't know. I'm not very happy about it. I'm pointing to terrible things in the country. I get why people are mad at America. I sure do. I completely do. But I don't. And I'm scared because the old white majority will get ever more radicalized in this country the more it feels demographically threatened by immigrants and by the rest of the world. And these are descendants of the people who thought it was better to have mass slaughter in the Civil War than give up owning other human beings as slaves. So it goes, there's something very dark in the American character. And you hate to see that as the most heavily armed and economically still most powerful country on earth. It's unfortunate. So it's nice to step back and find consolation in history and find consolation in narrative and say, well, I'll try to make the best of this as a citizen, but if I can't, this is sure an interesting thing that happened to the world, this United States. It sure is interesting. That's kind of the best I got. I won't say I'm embarrassed to be an American because there are so many good Americans and because the good things in this culture are really good, but the dark parts are really bad.
Thank you very much for seeing us and taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you. I wish you well on the rest of your global tour.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.